Hi, my name's Emily. I'm the Senior Engagement Officer for the Solent Seascape Project with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. And today we are on the Rocky Shore. I'm going to introduce you some of the common species found on the Rocky Shore and even some weird and wonderful things you might find on the strand line. Now, some of these words you might not recognise, so I'm going to talk you through them. The strand line is a part of the beach where the highest tide forms, and you often find what things are called flotsam and jetsam, and in there you often find lots of different kinds of shells, cuttlefish bones, weird and wonderful things. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we find in the strand line and then head down the shore into the sandy, more rocky areas where you're going to find crabs, anemones and such. Okay, so we're going to start off with one of my favourite species, well, two of my favourite species, oysters. Now, they might look the same to you, but they're actually different species. In this hand, I've got the Pacific oyster, and in this hand, I've got the beautiful native oyster. Our project's working to restore this particular oyster, and I'll tell you exactly why it's special in just a second, but we're going to give you a closer look first. So this one is a native species. It's meant to be in this environment, whereas this is what we call a non-native species. So at some point, and I believe it was around the 1960s, this actually was introduced to replace the loss of native oysters. However, it's from the Pacific, and it's not grown up and it's not evolved to be particularly in this environment, but it does very well. You're typically finding this oyster on what we call the intertidal shore. So this is the period of shore where the tide moves up and down it. Whereas this you're finding in what we call a subtidal shore. Or subtidal area. So this is often only very exposed at extremely low tides, or maybe never at all, and often covered in water. So what is so important about the native oyster? The native oyster is what we call an ecosystem engineer. Its mere presence in an environment creates a whole new ecosystem around itself. It provides a substrate, a surface for other organisms to live on and thrive, and it creates this kind of cascading effect. When you get organisms living there, you're going to get predation and so on and so forth. They're also filter feeders, and they purify our waters. They also store carbon in their shells and help towards carbon capture. The weight of the reefs that are formed stabilize sediment and helps prevent against coastal erosion, wave action and sediment loss. They're pretty amazing. These beautiful shells belong to the common whelk. The common whelk is a carnivorous sea snail, and it's kind of the wolf of the seashore. It is related to the garden snail, but it doesn't eat lettuce. It eats other shellfish, and it has a really unique way of doing this. It has a specialized tooth called a radula that's shaped like a drill. It will sneak up on its prey, like oysters, and it will spit on them. Its saliva has a kind of acid that softens the shell, and then they'll use their radula, the drill-like tooth, to drill a hole in the shell and then inject that animal with digestive juices and basically turn it into a delicious milkshake, or at least delicious for the whelk. What you might also find along the strand line or the shore is these weird bundles that kind of look like spongy masses of, well, they are eggs, and they belong to this common whelk here. Here we have the slipper limpet. Now this is what we call an invasive species. Its presence here was accidentally introduced and caused detrimental harm to the environment. They've done so well here because they have no predation whatsoever that they're one of the most common shells that you now find on our shores. And perhaps you've seen them yourselves. They kind of look like little slippers, which is where the name comes from. And they're very different from the limpets that we traditionally find on our shore because they don't move. They're sedentary, and they'll sit and form on top of each other. So they start their lives off in several larvae stages and settle as adults, build themselves a nice shell, but they'll sit directly on top of each other, forming these little arcs of friendship, I call them. And they're also filter feeders, so they do provide some service benefit to the ecosystems. They filter things. But they have a very unique sex life, and they'll change their sex depending on how many male and females are in that arc, so that they're constantly able to breed. Now this is a classic that you find on the shore, and maybe you recognize it. You certainly find it in pet shops. Maybe you want to feed your budgie, or dog likes chewing on it. It is the cuttlefish bone. Now, the cuttlefish is actually not a fish, it's a mollusk. A mollusk is defined by a mucous mantle and an internal or external shell. This is their internal shell. And so it's not a bone, it's a shell. And it's a very unique kind of shell because it has air pockets in it that allow this animal to move up and down the water column. It's also one of the most intelligent mollusks in the world, and it's classed as a sentient being and has the intelligence of a 3-year-old. It also has an incredibly unique eyesight that can see different waves of light, but one of the most impressive feats is their camouflage technology. They have tiny pigments and muscles all over their body, and these pigments are often 3 shades, kind of a yellow brown, a red brown, and then a black blue. And depending whether the pigments are surrounded by a ring of muscle called a chromatophore, and depending on whether that is constricted or relaxed depends how much of the pigment is showing. And that's how they actually observe their environment and then mimic it in their skin. So you need a pretty big brain size, I reckon, to do that. And in fact, their brain is 1/3 of their body size. They are a mollusk, as I said. They're related to the common whelk, and they also have a modified tooth, which is a beak shape. They produce ink to distract any predators that might have a go at them. They also have a very unusual breeding strategy, as in they breed and then die. So they live to about 1 to 2 years, and then they start creating this what's called a precopulative grey. So they start saying, hey, I'm ready to breed. And they signal to the male and females, and they get together, they have their breeding season, and then sadly they spend so much energy doing that, they die shortly after. So if you suddenly find a lot of cuttlefish bones on the beach, it might be there's been a recent breeding event, and that might be the reason for it. One of the more rarer finds that you might find on the shore could be a washed up seahorse. Here we have the long-snouted seahorse and the short-snouted seahorse. We get 2 types of seahorse here in the Solent, these two. And seahorses are quite remarkable and unfortunately endangered because their habitat, seagrass, is under threat and in decline. So the seahorse is actually a fish, though it looks like a very strange fish. And it has this really unique tail, which is a prehensile tail. And that means it has the ability to actually grab on and hold on to things. And they use this to hold on to seagrass. Now the females have a territory of around 100 square meters, and the males actually have a much smaller one on the female's territory, normally around half a square meter. They have courtship dances and they mate for life, probably because it's so hard to find each other in the seagrass if you can't swim too well. They have the ability of camouflage, and they have eyes that move independently of each other. The males are actually one of the only animals in the world to have a true male pregnancy. They have a male pregnancy pouch, which the female deposits eggs into, and he will fertilize them and then actually go through a kind of labor. And this can last up to 12 hours. Seahorses are usually found in seagrass beds, and this is why seagrass is so important, not just for the many benefits it provides, which you can see in one of our other videos, but for these little guys here. This strange, leathery looking thing is actually a ray egg. Ray and shark eggs, once they've hatched, do wash upon the shore, and you often find them in the strand line. Now there's a really interesting way you can actually identify the species of shark and rays that you find depending on the size and shape. A really good way to do that is visiting the Shark Trust website. They've got something called the Great Egg Case Hunt, and they have lots of diagrams on how to identify the type of species that you've got. So here we have the prongs or horns. This area here, which I also call flappy bits, but traditionally are called the fields. And here we have a ridge along the edge of the egg. Now some eggs have that, some don't, and it's called a keel. So the underside of a boat where it meets, the points of a boat meet, is called a keel. Same thing here. This is called a keel. These mysterious structures are known as sand mason worms. What you see sticking out the sediment is actually the very top of the case that surrounds the sand mason worm. They create these cases out of sediment and using a sticky mucus. And when the tide covers them, they pop out their heads and start filter feeding particles out of the water. So I'm super excited because when we're filming this, we've just found a live native oyster, and that might not mean a lot to you, but it means a lot to me. These are very rare animals that our project is by the Blue Marine Foundation is trying to restore native oysters in our Solent, and we've actually found a live adult one that's looking pretty decent. So this is a pretty big, exciting moment. Come and have a look. So it's only a single native oyster, but it is alive and it looks like it's doing well. So I'm going to leave it there and let it do its thing. So something else that's often washed upon the shore is this guy here, or guys, I should say. Now, scientists actually, for quite some time, thought this was a seaweed, and it's not. It's in disguise. It's colonial animals living together, communicating, building a structure that looks like seaweed to throw predators off, but actually they're tiny little animals, and this is called horn wrack, and they're a species of bryozoans. And if you look closely, you'll start to see that actually each part of this is made of tiny little holes where tiny little mouths would have been. People often forget about seaweeds on the shore, and I want to introduce you to a couple of common species you're likely to find. So seaweed is typically found on our shores and along our coasts, and they also have invasive species. So as I said, invasive species are introduced accidentally or in purpose and causing harm in the native environment which it finds itself. This is called Sargassum multicum, it's a fancy Latin word for it, also known as Japanese wireweed. It has these grape-like air bubbles in its structure and can typically be found in and around seagrass beds. So here we have the Irish sea moss, also known as Condus crispus in its Latin scientific name, and it is a red seaweed. One of the things I love about this particular seaweed is it turns a kind of iridescent blue sheen to it when put in water, and I can give you an example right here. This lovely branched looking seaweed is known as pepper dulse, and back in the day people would harvest this because of its peppery sweet taste. Wouldn't recommend it now though. We've just come across the remnants of a crab. Now this is the remnants of a common green shore crab, and actually it's what we call a molt. So this crab hasn't died. What it has done, because it has an exoskeleton, it can't grow bigger than its exoskeleton. So periodically over time it needs to shed its molt, it needs to molt its skin, its hard exoskeleton, and grow a new one. And this one's done it exceptionally well. And these soft fleshy bits are actually its gills that come off and they regrow again. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learnt something. Just bear in mind, if you are on the shore looking at anything live, that it is a living animal, so be gentle, be careful where you place your feet, and also be safe. Make sure you're checking the tides before you go out and you're letting someone know where you are at all times. Thank you again, and what will you find on your next beach adventure?